Hey guys, welcome to the second episode of the Performance Theory YouTube channel. So I thought today to go away from the theoretical and maybe just talk about some practical mindsets that I use with athletes when approaching athletic training. So this is kind of like really individualized to the way that I work. Maybe other coaches have different mindsets and different ways that they would want to do things. But this is how I think about training and how I believe an efficient program is put in place and executed. So the first thing that I want to really highlight is that all athletic training needs to be goal driven. Now that's quite basic. I know a lot of people and probably 99% of the coaches out there would agree with me. But for me, it's not only about the seasonal goal setting. It's also about within each training day and training phase. So maybe you have your national championships or maybe world champs, whatever the goal at the end of the season or in the middle of the season might be. We know the time periods and the races where we want to be good at, where we really want to attain our best form. So there's two types of goals that I tell people to set. One is performance goals and the other one is outcome goals. So let's take an example of national time trial championships. You maybe want to go to the race and you know, okay, cool, for 40 minutes you need to keep 380 watts as a standard. Maybe you can base that off of previous data, of previous results, or maybe the winner of the previous year, something like that. Whatever your metric is that you're using, you would establish, okay, you need to keep 380 watts for 40 minutes with all your aerodynamics and your setup and everything in order to get the result that you want. So that's a performance measurement goal. We know that 380 watts is what we want to attain. An outcome goal would be something like you want to finish on the podium, you want to win the race, or you want to finish in the top 5. So a lot of times you can attain the performance goal, but maybe somebody rocks up on the day and his watts a kilo or aerodynamics or whatever it would be better than yours, and the 380 watts is not sufficient for you to bring through the win or the outcome goal that you have set in mind. The other thing that I want to say is based on the previous video when we spoke about the hormetic process is every day also needs to have a goal and every training block needs to have a goal. Like I tell guys, you never go out on the bike unless you know exactly what the purpose of that day is. Now I know there are days which would be like recovery rides and things where people just go out, ride their bike for fun, low TSS, and there's a space for that in the athletic program as well. But then again, the goal of that day is to recover. So what I teach guys is to distinguish between phases where you load and phases where you deload. So you need, when you get on the bike in the morning, you need to know what the goal of that day is. Okay, today's a rest day. I'm going to keep to my recovery zone, or today is a threshold day, so this is what's set out for me, and you know why you need to do it, and you 100% buy into it, the goal that you need to do that day. I think a lot of people, and there's a level for everything, don't get me wrong, like people who do not have very specific goals, who might just want to be healthy and fit, yes, of course, there's less goal setting within each day needed for them. But guys who I work with who have really ambitious goals for the future, it's quite important for about, I would say, 320 days of the year to really be focused and know this is what this day is for, this is what I'm working on for this day. It might also be technical things like, okay, cool, today I've got 3 20-minute climbs and I'm really going to focus on the descending and keep to my zones on the climbs. Like really put out every day and know why you're getting on the bike and what the purpose of that day is. And that actually leads me into my second point, is that you need to buy into your training program. This also ties in very closely with the coach-client relationship. So what I basically mean by that is that when you get a program, you need to understand exactly what each day is for, why it is structured the way it is, and that's where you can ask your coach questions. If there's also things like you feel like, you know, there's a certain way, or not a certain way, but let's say certain efforts that you feel that really help you, or certain things that you perceive to be lesser strengths when you train and you want to focus on that, I think a healthy client-coach relationships is able to accommodate for that. But at the end of the day, when you walk away from the meeting or when it sets out on Training Peaks, you need to buy in 100% to the training program that you have done. I've seen it even in my beginning days of coaching also. I would have this very strict thing that I've set out, and then sometimes you see that guys go and do a few extra efforts at the end, and when I speak to them about it, they're like, okay, they really felt they wanted to work a bit on this or that in their training. And honestly, that's where I learned very early on to be like, okay, in a client coach meeting, set out what I believe that needs to be done and then value their input as well, what they feel like. Maybe it's one of the focus sessions, or maybe it's just something in the training program that they also feel that they want to incorporate. And I believe a good coach is able to incorporate the ideas of the athlete as well. And I think it's very important. I don't subscribe to the theory of you need to have this like one coach that just puts out everything and it has to be done exactly like that. There's no other way. I really don't subscribe to that. So the third point that I want to bring across is to develop intrinsic motivation. So there's two types of motivation the way that I see it. There's extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation might be, the fame, the glory of winning a race, or, the rewards that you would get from it, like prize money or trophies or medals or whatever. Those things are normally external to yourself. And a lot of people are motivated by that. Now, I don't have a problem with that type of motivation. The problem is if it's not intrinsic motivation, like the motivation within yourself, your desire and your drive to attain that goal. A lot of times, like we're facing now with this COVID-19 thing around the world where we can't ride outside and all of that, it's very hard to keep motivated. Perfect example, because now everyone has to be stuck indoors for 1, 2, we don't know, many months, and we don't know what races are coming up. So if you are driven by the rewards of the races and the fame and fortune from that, it's going to be very difficult to get you through a time like this, because you never know when that's going to be. So this is when you'd see those types of people holding back within their training. But the people who have that drive inside of them, who want to do it just because they aspire to that athletic career one day, they know irrespective of what the next race is going to be, they want to be a professional, or they want to attain their goals. Those are the type of people who are going to be able to have the most consistency in their training. Same as with guys who thrive on extrinsic motivation. Like maybe you have a really bad race and it ends up being, I won't say embarrassing, but yeah, it's honestly not the goal that you've wanted. Those people normally take a few weeks in order to gain that motivation back to train for the next event. Whereas people with intrinsic motivation might be not really hard in a race and come back 3-4 days later and be like, okay, cool, I love what I do and I'm going to start building for the next race. The fourth point that I want to bring across is it's very important to design the performance. So find ways that you can measure, track, and periodize your preparation to the race. So that's why I always believe it's important to have a coach. And the other thing is to really read up and study as much as you can before you even get to the race. Now, this could be like riding the routes before, maybe going and looking at previous year's Strava data. You can speak to people who've done the races before, maybe go on Google Maps, go see what the roads are like, what the terrain is like. Like there's so many preparation that you can do beforehand. And I had a rider like that 2 years back. He would honestly rock up the day of the race and he would not even have looked at the profile of the race or anything like that. And then once he started doing that, obviously also working with me as a coach for a few months, his improvements in his results was significant just because he rocked up the day and he knew like, okay, cool, there's a 20-minute climb, 2 10-minute climbs, and possibly a sprint finish or whatever the day might have been. But he had it in his mind what was expected, what was the demands of the performance of the day, and not just like blindly ticking off the days of the training program and hoping for the best on race day. So being prepared as much as you can and really putting detail with your coach into your training plan, that would give you the best results, in my opinion, on race day. The fifth point, and it builds on what I've discussed in the previous video, is that freshness is your friend. Like a lot of people always think that professional athletes are normally always tired, they're like going through these massive loading phases, and some people do. Like some people follow that philosophy of you like always on the brink of overtraining and then you start tapering down for events. I believe something of the opposite. Yes, I do want guys to do heavy loads, but loads that they have built a foundation for. So progression over a long period of time, and in the end of the days, or when you have a firm training foundation, then you can go to massive training blocks. But I always want guys to get back to the thing of never being too far away from freshness. Some people use the quotes and say like it's better to be 10% undertrained than 5% overtrained, those types of things. I just believe that you always need to be very close to freshness, because that helps you mentally get through your training. It helps you to never lose the intrinsic motivation, because one of the parameters people measure overtraining by is your drive to train. So I always want guys to be excited about getting on the bike. They need to enjoy it. And I speak to my athletes every day, so then I can ask them, listen, man, how's it going? Are you enjoying your training? All of that stuff. And also the other thing with freshness is guys regularly then hit either personal bests in power, or they just do workouts which they're really happy about. And success builds success. If a guy comes back and he absolutely nailed his, let's say, 4 times 10 threshold efforts, that builds encouragement into the next few days of training. Like that, he can use that as motivation. Whereas if you have guys always on the brink of overtraining and they're not really hitting their numbers, that is very counterproductive. So I always lean towards making sure an athlete is never too far away from freshness. And then it's very easy when you approach race day to drop down, focus on lower volumes, get your intensity right, and then obviously hitting it on race day. The sixth thing that I want to talk about is developing an athletic lifestyle. Like a lot of people think that if you go out on the bike, you smash your workout and you come back, that's the end of the day. But if you want to be a really high performing athlete, you need to build an athletic lifestyle around your training. This is like your sleep schedule. Like, do you go to sleep more or less the same time of the day? Do you wake up more or less the same time of the morning? How do you approach your nutrition? What do you go buy when you go to the grocery store? What do you stock up your cupboards with? What recovery strategies do you use? Do you go out in the malls most days after you've trained, or do you actually like keep to home a bit, maybe Netflix, keep off your feet and get ready for the next day? Also, like preparing around your training, like making sure your nutrition and everything is sorted for the next day, organizing your rides with friends, whatever it might be around your training is a lot of times what determines the success of the actual training that you're putting in. I'm going to paraphrase a quote of a guy really badly. He used it in a nutrition example, but I think a good athletic lifestyle is not going to make a mediocre athlete a champion, but a champion might become a mediocre athlete if he doesn't have a good athletic lifestyle built around his training. This point number 7, success is built on the basics. Now, this is one thing that I was guilty of early in the day, and I think a lot of people are still in that mindset where they think that professional training programs are incredibly technical and advanced, and it's all just these massive graphs and just a lot of data, but a lot of those programs are still built on the basics. So people kind of have this idea of if you're in the world tour, it's like they follow these programs that are stored in Area 51 or something like that, and only a select few of people have access to it. Now, don't get me wrong, there is a high level of complexity to the way that they do things. There is a lot of data crunching and a lot of that, but still, if you look at the physical workouts, it would still include 20-minute sub-threshold efforts, 5-minute efforts, 1-minute repeats. All the stuff that are actually in general training programs people prescribe would still be in their programs. There might be more race-specific efforts and stuff that I've seen that is okay, cool, that's actually very interesting. I've never thought of it that way. There is that element, but a lot of the foundational and preparation work that they do is very general stuff, using the basics, and over a long period of time just building up on the basics. They use the same type of testing that is available in most literature. Some guys have their own testing protocols, which a coach feels like this is how he measures readiness for races and all of that. Like, everyone has their own individual system, but the mindset that I'm addressing is that people think once you hit that World Tour, Pro, Continental, whatever threshold, everything just becomes so technical and scientific. Now, it does increase in complexity, but still, all of those athletes still focus on the basics on a daily basis. So what I believe with mindset number 8 is that you would only ever be as good as your hardest session, which you have a foundation for. So what I've seen with athletes a few times is that everyone loves going to do the long rides, the sub-threshold work, the stuff that's really not that physically and mentally demanding. And then sometimes on, the VO2 max days, or like the days that really hurt a lot, guys would be like, oh, sorry, I just didn't feel that well, or they would put less effort into those, but they think that if they just really focus on all the other stuff and maybe give 80% effort on the main focus days, that wouldn't inhibit them from progressing to a certain level. But the thing is, those days are really the key days. So I tell guys, I mark those days very specifically on Training Peaks, and I tell guys, listen, you build up your motivation for that, and when you get to that day, your game face is on, and you're going to do that session to the best of your abilities. Like, that is the key sessions that I highlight 3 weeks in advance, and I tell guys these are the focus sessions. These might be the things that they're really good at, their race winning efforts. Let's say a sprinter really needs to focus on his strength training, his sprint repeats, and all the progressive sprint workouts that I give them. Or it might be a time trial rider where I say, okay, cool, today we're doing very high intensity threshold work, this is your game face day, and I need your best on this day. That is what's going to propel guys to success in races. Then the other spectrum of it is you need to look at what you are not that good at. Now, I don't like to speak of weaknesses, especially with athletes. I think it's very important to refine the way that you talk to yourself and that athletes talk to themselves. I don't use the word weaknesses. I'd rather say lesser strengths. And That is why I would tell guys, even if you're focusing on your lesser strengths on that day, it's very important that you guys put full focus into that session. So mindset number 9 that I want to share is that you have to develop overall athleticism. Once again, as I said in the previous points, it's not just about the training that you do on the bike. There's a lot of training that takes place around the bike. Let's say coordination training, mobility, flexibility, strength training, all of that builds a well-rounded athlete. Now, in the beginning days, it's not necessary to be overly technical with all of that stuff, but if you go and look at Nino Schurter and his videos and stuff, there comes a point where that type of stuff becomes quite essential to success. So I'm not saying that everyone starting out who just got their bike needs to start incorporating all those types of things, but as you progress on your athletic journey, make sure that you start incorporating these things into your training. So let's build on this example. So let's say you are an under 23 athlete, you just signed as a stagiaire for a team, and then you haven't done the foundation of mobility, strength training, and flexibility, and suddenly they require you to get on a TT bike and be in this very aggressive aero position for an upcoming race. If you haven't built the foundation or prepared for that, it's going to take you longer to adapt in that position. And that's where I tell guys, like, try really early on to focus on these small things in your training, because one day that might be really crucial factors that you need to progress to the next level. So start with that as early as you can within your athletic journey. Point number 10 that I really want to bring across to guys is to think long term about their training. I can't tell you guys how many times I've sat across from people at a first client coach meeting and they would tell me where they want to be or what they want to do at an event in 6 to 12 months. Now that obviously is possible to increase your level within that time period, maybe 1 or 2 levels above where you are now. But I always try to get guys back of thinking long term, like laying a foundation for really consistent performances in the future, building a foundation level where we can be very consistent with our training and marginally building on that over a long period of time. That is ultimately how we're going to get our most consistent performances. Like, a lot of people want to have these very aggressive training blocks to try and peak for one event, and it's very hard to maintain if you have that type of mentality. So I always tell guys, have your short-term goals. Let's focus on that. Let's prepare well for that. But let's not lose sight of the 3 to 5 year vision where you might want to be, especially for guys who are new to the sport or very young. They're very early into their athletic journey, and there will be races year on year on year. Like, the next 6 months or the next 12 months is not the be-all and end-all of your cycling career. And that's why I always tell guys, yes, let's have these short-term goals, but let's not lose focus for what might be to come in 2, 3 or 5 years, and let's always focus on building and increasing that foundation. So point number 11 is to work with your body and not against it. Like, there's a lot of ways where people actually harm themselves by trying to work harder or get close to that exhaustion phase of adaptation, like we spoke of in the previous video. That's actually when you'll see your body starts working against you. You can't get your heart rate up, you wake up in the mornings and you feel absolutely flat, or you lose that mental drive. These are all protective systems of the body in order to try and get you to have an intermittent rest period so that the body can adapt, and then you can load again after that. But like I said, the goal of each cell in the human body is to maintain survival. And if you're going to load to a point where it threatens the survival of cells or suppresses systems within the body is going to react, try to protect itself. And that's why when you go into these phases of overtraining or get close to overtraining, you might see a lot of physiological things in the body that's actually trying to hold you back to get to a point where you can rest, recover, and the body can adapt. So just be very mindful of that. And always, like I said with the previous point, is work on freshness. Try to really always keep close to freshness and far away from overtraining, and just marginally increase over a long period of time. So point number 12, what I want to speak to you guys is getting consistency before you get fancy. Like, consistency to me is the most important thing, and I think I've said it quite a few times already in these first 2 videos, and this doesn't just only apply to training, this applies to your nutrition, your sleep patterns, but to find things that you can be consistent in. Like, I know there's a lot of programs that people sell that are 6, 12, 18, 24 month programs, which could be really good. I'm not gunning it as a concept, but for me it's important to see, can I sustain this level of training over a long period of time? Can I sustain this way of eating for a long period of time? Like, a lot of people want to make extreme changes to their diets or their training. I always ask the question, how long can you sustain that for? Whether it be your lifestyle, your physiology, what could be the limiting factor to it? And I would always tell guys, only start practices in your training and lifestyle that you can sustain over a long period of time, so we can attain consistency and then build up from that. Maybe for the nutrition example is that you find a way of eating that works for you in your environment. The food is readily available, because it's hard for professional athletes sometimes because you travel to so many places and that food is not everywhere available. So that's why I believe it's very hard following these strict diets, but getting nutrition principles that you can follow most places in the world, that you can follow most days of the year, that works in with your lifestyle. And then over time, as you reach higher levels and as it all becomes a bit more complex, you can refine and build on that, but not have these extreme changes between schools of thought every few months. So that's why I really value consistency and I make it the number one priority, and we can always refine and build off of that. So point number 13 might be offensive to some people, but this is to consult common sense often. Like, there's so many information, so much marketing, and like people speaking on group rides about new things that they are trying, new products available, where people would always, they're so motivated for their athletic goals, they would jump at all of these things trying to see where they can make these marginal gains. A lot of these things are not scientifically founded or founded on principles that are actually valid and proven to work. And I always tell guys, like, don't make changes before races. Don't go to buy every second best product that's out there. Like, really go research it well, speak to leading people in the industry, and then make decisions. Not, jump at every second thing somebody says. Like, I had an athlete before one of his key events last year. He started intermittent fasting, a vegan diet, and restricting his calories all in the span of about a week and a half, because he went to speak to someone who is actually an electrician, but he read some book or watched some documentary, and this guy immediately made the switch, and he called me a few days later and said, like, he's got no energy, he feels flat, this is what he started doing. And it took me about 3 days to calm down after we had that conversation, because it was quite close to his goal race. And he wanted to, get in tip-top shape for that, get his body composition down. And we were on a trend of getting his body composition right for the race, but he wanted to make these extreme changes based on what someone said, and it really didn't go well. He was really flat by the end of that week, restricting his calories by that much and changing almost everything compared to how he used to eat in the past. So that's one thing I would really tell guys, is make sure that you speak to a coach or a professional that really knows the industry well before making decisions. And I had a conversation with one of the doctors at Lotto Soudal not long ago, where we spoke about equipment, like for people that always want to get fancy very quickly, buy these things, and every second product saves you X amount of watts and all of that. Get back to a point where you can focus on consistency, there it is again, and then build up from that. Like, get your baseline standard and always build up from that. Now, we're just like with regards to the equipment, I feel that the day when you need that level of equipment, someone will give it to you, someone will sponsor it to you. If you're not at that level yet, it's probably not necessary. Now, if you have the financial resources, obviously have fun, enjoy it for what it is. Maybe it saves you a few watts here and there, but I want young guys to get away from the mindset that they need the new Envy wheels or whatever it is in order to perform at the next level. It'll always come from your body. And I've seen quite big races, one on Shimano 105 group sets, like entry level equipment, and that was not the limiting factor towards winning the race. So, and then the last of all of the mindsets is to have fun. I believe that as a really good coach or someone that can work with an athlete very well, you need to program in things that they enjoy. This might be coffee rides with friends on recovery days, just going out riding your bike, not even really looking at your Garmin, but still recording the data, just having fun, enjoying cycling for what it is. And maybe you have endurance days where you set a bit of a broad zone for the guy to keep in, and he can go and ride a route that he enjoys or ride with friends who are more or less at his level, so he can still get the training effect, but you kind of build things into the training and the program that they do enjoy. So thank you guys very much for watching this video. I want to do the next video on bioenergetics and setting your training zones. Once again, go a bit more to the theory and then also the practical implementation onto your Training Peaks or whatever software that you use. So I hope you guys found this valuable, and I hope you guys could take something from it, and I'll see you guys on the next video.